What we found in your room justified all our fears. How long have you been reading these horrid books?
That old black magic has me.
That's right.
That old black magic
Close your eyes.
The door opened, as though being pulled by some unknown force.
Welcome to the Sate podcast, hosted by Cy and Dylan Andrews.
Howdy.
Today, we're going to be talking about how we utilize occult and divination tools to help with creativity. By that, I mean, how can we use tarot, for example, to help you get out of a narrative plot or twist, or how you can use automatic writing to help with poetry, or even interpreting dreams to try and get you fresh new ideas for novels, TV shows, or even essays that you've actually considered writing.
Speaking of writing, you had recently done an article for the Bard of the Isles website, which is just a writing community. Why don't you explain to our listeners just what that article was about?
Yeah, sure. It was actually about how I use tarot and tarot card spreads to help me with the narrative structure or plotting devices, how to get myself out of any narrative ditches that I might find myself in, and at the same time, how you can use tarot and tarot card spreads to help you with character development if you are writing a novel. I didn't, however, go into detail about how I use tarot for any other genres or mediums as far as literature is concerned. But yeah, that was my most recent article. It was the first ever article, actually, that I'd ever published on a different website. So I feel really both professional and quite successful in that.
You mentioned other genres and mediums.
Yeah.
So what did you mean by that, just for the listeners who...
Okay, so genre actually goes beyond the idea of settings and moods that you have for a particular novel, especially novels. Genre, obviously, most people understand, differentiates between fantasy, horror, love, and that kind of stuff. But from an academic point of view, you can also refer to various literature mediums as genres. So the genre of poetry, the genre of the novel, the genre of non-fiction, the genre of the essay, or the essay collection and stuff like that. So that's what I mean by genre as well. So yeah, hopefully that's clear.
So obviously you could use this technique from the get-go and lay out a tarot spread.
Yes.
And because the tarot uses the imagery of the Fool's Journey, you could have it as like an initiating sequence where you lay out a spread and then you use that as the entire plot of the novel, and you just kind of take them through this archetypal experience until they reach whatever the card was. Say, for example, it's ruin. You could tell a tale of this fool's journey into ruin through the steps that got them there, and then, or you could use it like with a positive spread to convey some sort of illumination or understanding that these characters can develop by the advancement of going through the spread that you've laid out.
Yeah.
How is it that you utilize it? So you don't use it from the beginning, you use it later on as almost like a choose your own adventure type deal?
Yeah, because I mean, that idea is really superb, especially if you're learning how to write or if you're just wanting to practice your writing skills, if you're trying to get through a writing block. That's a really good method to try and get yourself out of that rut. But for me, it's more a case of I sling the cards or I draw the cards depending on particular situations or sequences, or like I said, with certain characters.
That seems like a good place to start. Why don't you provide an example then of how you can utilize tarot to develop a character?
Sure. With my character development, especially if it's for a new story, this is usually how my stories all start. I'll usually start hearing the name of the character. I'll then write down the name of the character and then proceed to use my cards to help me develop their personality traits. So I always try to make sure that I have at least 3 good traits about them and then also have 3 flaws about them as well. That way I can sort of start making a much more well-rounded characterization. So I'll draw 3 cards for their positive traits, 3 cards for their negative traits, and sometimes, not very often, depending on how far I've got with this planning and the world building, I'll then decide whether or not that character is going to be killed at the beginning, the middle, or the end of the story. And in that particular case, I will then draw only one card that can help me reveal how they're going to be killed and when they're going to be killed and what the theme of their death or their life could be for that particular story. So that's how I do it in the most basic form. As I go on with the writing process, assuming that I've actually then started the story and I've got quite a few characters by this point and I'm doing pretty well as far as narrative structuring and writing out the plot is going, if I want to add a bit more complexity, perhaps a little bit more excitement to the story, especially within the middle build of the book, I can then start drawing on the tarot cards to then give me ideas and ways of how I could then spice up the story a little bit more. So if it sounds by that point that my story seems a little bit generic and then all the characters seem like they're all a bunch of Mary Sues and they're all basically perfect, then you've got like the one manic pixie dream girl or something, and I want to change things up, that's when I'll go back to the idea of whether I should kill that character off or not, or which character or which characters I could then have develop a sort of conflict with each other when they actually started out as friends in the beginning. So tarot card is really helpful for all various points of the story, especially with character development. It's something that it's ever changing, and I'll always turn to tarot cards to help me do that.
So I was thinking about when you just start a character, you could also probably then use tarot cards to pull like one card, and because there's an astrological aspect tied to each card, you could then have like this one's like a you can have it then like using the archetypes of like the zodiac, like certain personality traits. You can then attribute those to your characters based on random chance rather than always writing a character like yourself. So for example, you can create like an Aries character who's stubborn and driven and passionate because you pulled a card that is representative of that.
Yeah, that's really handy.
There's a lot of ways I think you could probably generate character traits and personalities from tarot.
Yeah, that's actually very, very true. But it also, again, depends on the story that you're writing. For example, I'm in the middle of writing a urban fantasy witch series known as The Wormwood Witches. Unfortunately, I couldn't use the astrological aspects for my characters because they were already kind of picked out beforehand when I was in and out of my dream state for a while when I was coming up with the story. And their particular astrological signs have already been picked because it fits into the story for a particular reason. But that is actually a really wicked idea. I really like that. So I'll definitely use that in future for other stories.
So that was a perfect example of how to use it for character. But before I asked about character, you were talking also about narrative devices and sequences. So how would it be utilized for that?
It's a bit more complex when it comes to like using tarot to help you with plotting, to help you with sequences and chapters, because there's a lot more to it. Other than sort of planning out your story from start to end, or maybe start to the middle, you have to then break down each sequence. Normally within a story, you have the main story that most readers will be fully aware of. So for example, if you're following the hero and the hero's journey, but there's also another underlining story that runs almost linear to the main plot, and you also have to plan for that. On top of that, there's also this thing called the middle build. The middle build is the bane of my life. It is the bane of most writers' lives. And it's also, unfortunately, the part of the book that can make or break a story. Readers will get to a point in the middle of the book where if it just seems too clunky, there's too much information, or it just seems really boring, you can really lose your readers at that point, and then they will judge your entire book based on their experience with the middle build and whether or not they actually gave up reading or not. So in order to spice up the middle build, at least for me, because it's something that I'm very conscious about, I will then use tarot cards according to each chapter or depending on a particular sequence of events that are occurring between certain characters and such and so forth in order to kind of spice it up. So
how though? Try to give a bit more of like an outline. So say someone isn't going to read the article or watch the video. Yeah. Can you just kind of visually break down how this would look, how you would lay the cards out, and how you would just structure this so that they could make sense of it?
Sure. I'll give you an example. Okay. I will draw 5 cards for my simple plot spread. What that basically will help me do is define, if I get to a particular fork in the road, which way my character's narrative is going to play out. I will then set out 2 narrative questions or queries, and then having drawn the card, I will then decide which one seems to sound the most spiciest, and that's the route that I will end up taking. So I will draw the first card. That will reveal the theme or the issue that I might have at hand. So for example, the first card that I'll end up drawing for this character called Sienna might be the Fool. The Fool being an archetype for the idea of naivety, the start of a new journey, the start of new paths, not knowing where you're going, stepping into the abyss without really having any expectations or whatever. So that's the kind of overall theme that I have for Sienna. She's going to be embarking on something, or at least going into a new sequence of events without really much forethought or afterthought. She's just going to go for it and then just hope for the best. She's impulsive like that. She's an Aries. So path A is the idea of whether I should push her down the path of career, for example. So the first card that I may draw up will then represent the theme around the idea of career. So that first card could end up being the Magician. The Magician being the archetype of someone who's got all of their tools to hand, and you use all of those tools to try and sort of allow yourself to become, or allow yourself to develop to become the more developed magician that you need to be. So in that case, career, she's got tools, she's got all the things that she needs for career, so there shouldn't be any problems, right? But in order then to spice up even more of that plot, I'll then draw another card. For example, the Five of Wands. The Five of Wands is normally depicted where there's one person wearing one colour, say bright yellow, for example, and the other 4 characters are wearing all the same colour, so they could all be wearing brown or black, for example. They've all got 5 wands raised in the air, and it looks like they're in the middle of a fight. What that card will then symbolize is that even though things might be going well and you might need to continue persevering down a slightly more difficult path or trying to get yourself out of a slightly difficult situation, you have to stand firm and stand firm in what you believe in. So in this case, it can also sort of reveal to you the idea of conflict, inner conflict or conflict in general with other people. So in this case, she's gone down the path of career with the Magician, with the tools that she has, and the friends that she has in the story. However, I can then twist it and turn it so that those 4 other people who are wearing different colours could represent the friends that she's made so far or already has, all turning against her. And then suddenly her career is not quite working in her favour. However, I could also then turn that into a case or a situation where one of the villains could end up being killed as a result. So it's both a good aspect and a bad idea to go down that particular route. With the other path, the idea of, I guess you could say, plot B, at the other end of the fork in the road, I could then perhaps focus on her love life. So she does have someone in the story who she does have a loving relationship with. So if she were to embark down that path instead of career, what could that spell for me? So the card that I could draw out there could be the Lovers. Okay, that's a really strong card representing balance, unity, love. You couldn't get any more lovey-dovey than ever with that particular card. So, okay, things are looking positive. The outlook is pretty great. So if I were to go down this path, things could turn out to be pretty good between the both of them. I could spice it up a little bit more and perhaps there could be a baby involved. She could end up falling pregnant. Now, to spice it up even more, remembering the rest of the story being a case of she's a witch who's fighting a villain or a series of villains, I could spice it up. So I could then bring out another card which could help with the plot twisting. That card could end up being, I don't know, the Strength card, for example. The Strength card being how to stand firm, how to find strength. It's the power of working within the 5th house as well as with the power of Leo. And those are really good traits to sort of have. How I could spice that up, however, is that with the idea of standing strong and staying firm to your story, what Sienna could end up doing is, even though she could end up pregnant and being in a loving relationship, she has to stand strong, leave her new family behind in order to get back to the main aspect of the story, which is ultimately fighting a villain and potentially losing her life, or putting her lover, who isn't a witch, and her unborn baby at risk. Again, that will help juice up the story.
That's certainly an interesting use of the tarot, and that there is a bit more complex for someone who may not be overly familiar with tarot.
Yeah.
But it almost reminds me of this aspect of, well, a lot of conspiracy theorists always throw the Freemasonic saying order ab chaos, order out of chaos, to mean they create all this havoc in the world and then come up with the solutions. So like they'll stage this mass protest and then they'll bring in the military to solve it. Like there's always like a create a chaos and then bring up the solution.
Yes.
But I like to see that saying as more of its transcendental meaning. So using tarot, for example, you are creating chaos. You're not just going with the organized rhythm of your free-forming thoughts.
Yes.
You're throwing wedges into it and then playing off of those circumstances and opening up new channels by doing so.
Absolutely.
I also used to, for example, with writing, I found that Gematria worked amazing for the same aspect. So, for example, I came up with this story called The Temple, which I do plan on writing. And one of the characters is a psychic whose name was Susie Seer.
Yeah.
And they called her Susie the Star Seer because she was a psychic. She had a little shop, and she sees this basically like this apocalyptic event happening. And then I had maybe a cast of 12 people whose narratives would all flow throughout the series. Mm-hmm. And when I was choosing their names, I would then find out the geometric value of it. So, for example, one scene I can recall, this was years ago I was working on this, so it's not fresh, and I don't know the exact names or the results.
Yeah.
But, for example, one scene was Susie was trapped, or she's locked away, or she's missing, and this other character who's a police officer is in the car with a boy, and they're trying to get to her, and her name, I used everything pretty much that her name was related to that was fitting to the story, that was just interesting. So for example, like locusts shared the same value as her name, so when they were in the car and thinking about her, locusts are hitting the car, and I just used different aspects of that. So
that's really interesting.
Just pull a name, see what like random words and things you can associate, and then just throw them into the story as kind of these chaotic elements that you then organize and turn into something of meaning.
Yeah.
And you can structure all of this chaotic data into something that is more beautiful and rich. And it's almost like a way to world build just by utilizing something that's out of your own control, right?
Yeah,
with the tarot
that's
cards.
actually a really good idea, especially if you go and focus on particular elements when you're using gematria. You can then end up building towards, especially in the early part of a novel, the inciting incidents. The inciting incidents being like these tiny little plot tropes or plot devices that are used to help build up the story, to help build up the mystery or the need to fight, or to try and get the hero to eventually embark on the journey that they've for so long have been saying no to. It finally pushes them towards whatever goal that they need to end up embarking on in order to accomplish. So yeah, gematria is actually really handy for that. I've never actually used that before.
And for just as an example, like say you type in the character's name and he was going to be a good character, but then you're looking at all the name associations through geometric values that are shared, and it might be like the most evil person on earth, like evil embodiment, or like, and you see like all the stuff,
Antichrist ass wipe.
and then you're like, okay, well maybe I should play into this and onboard those traits as like a backstory for this character. So yeah, there's a lot of ways you can divine a story just by playing with
and
these malleable
with what you've actually just said, it's really important. You don't want a character whose traits are always good. That is like the most boring 2D flat underdeveloped character that you could have in a story. So if you have flaws as well and really play into those flaws, you can really make a very complex character. You can make the relationships that they have with other characters also equally as complex, and thus it will make a very, theme word of the day, spicy story. So yeah, that's actually really handy. So one of the gematria sources that you tend to use is what?
Well, you could use your own if you have a notebook. You can get like the Pythagorean values, or you can. There's a website, Gematrix, which is handy. And depends if you're using Gematria or if you're using like Greek isosophy. It just depends on what you're using. But just type in Gematria on Google and you can find various websites to do it, or you can create your own chart and start creating your own tables based on words that you're just interested in, or you can use whatever source you wish. The internet makes many tools available.
Yeah, that's really handy. And with the idea of like creating lists, that's also weirdly enough how I also list down character names, because I have a weird way of how character names come to me. And I have on my phone what I've sort of labeled as the Grand Master list of names. And then sometimes I check the Gematria for first names and last names, just to see if there's any significance as to why those particular names came to me either in dreams or through automatic writing or whatnot. So that's actually kind of helpful as well. It gives you a bit more insight and a bit more background into the characterization.
Mm-hmm. And just while we're talking about it, in past life regression, I also use Gematria values to kind of see if you're given a name in a past life regression, maybe there's some hidden meaning in the Gematria. So I always inspect that as well.
Yeah. While it might seem really easy to use tarot once you actually get a hang of it for narratives, the one aspect about tarot that I highly respect is the fact that as people, as human beings, we are constantly in a state of denial about certain things and certain situations, and our subconscious has to try and make a head and tail of all the experiences that we've had day to day. With writing, tarot can really help you not be a lazy writer. And by that, I mean, there are two particular areas that tarot can really help you put the foot down on some of the denial that you might be facing when writing your stories. So, for example, one of those things is the idea of the I had no choice trope that's often used in novels. It's one thing that I cannot stand when it comes to certain novels, especially YA, where you'll have a character, for example, character A, who has to make a really difficult decision between situation A and situation B. It's not necessarily a moral dilemma, like do you save the one person over the five or something like that. But then later on, you then find out that that character didn't make a choice whatsoever, or the choice that they did make was actually detrimental for both ideas. So they ended up like inventing or creating like choice C and then going with that. When another character then confronts that particular character and says, why did you make the decision that you did? The answer that they then give is, I had no choice. I hate that. It's so lazy. It just means that you as a writer then felt like you couldn't find your way out, and all you could do to sort of bridge two aspects of your story together was to make a really lazy decision. The thing about tarot is sometimes you have to face the uncomfortable, and tarot is just a tool. It's a toolkit to kind of bring out certain archetypes. Like I said, if there are things that you are trying to deny or that you've put under a state of denial in your life, the tarot cards will give no fucks and they will force you to confront those particular issues. So, for example, if your character A has a choice to make between the life of saving maybe the villain towards the end of the novel or choosing the hero at the end of the novel, and you're not entirely sure how to go about it, and you draw a card for the villain that happens to be, I don't know, the devil card, you will immediately clock right away that the idea of the devil card being one of don't make bad choices, don't make bad habits, try not to get addicted to anything, don't get too frivolous about things.
Try not to swear during a podcast.
Yeah, or that. Unless you're British, you can get away with it. Then you immediately know from that point on, I can't keep this villain for whatever reason. Now I need to go off and structure a really good way to not only kill the villain, but also keep the story exciting and keep it as a page turner and an enjoyable experience for the reader. That way you don't even have to draw a card for the hero aspect. But like I said, if you wanted to weigh up those two choices, then by all means, draw a card for the villain, draw a card for the hero, and then you can make a decision or a choice as the writer for the character to then be able to take on. So tarot will make you force you to answer things or face things that you've tried really hard to avoid for a while. Like I said, tarot will just kind of get you there. It's a very helpful tool in that way.
And you're not chained to the cards either. So, for example, like I know a lot of people when they do readings, they have a hesitancy like when they see the cards. The cards are available for interpretation. So like a
Yes.
death card doesn't mean death. It could have many different meanings and often doesn't mean like physical death.
Yeah.
So in the same way though, like say for example, as a novice, someone was writing a story and they drew some cards for their characters or the situation because they wanted I don't know where I can take my story.
Yeah.
They pull a card, it's the death card, and they go, oh no, but I really wanted her to go live and be happy and do this, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But maybe they just weren't fully aware that that's the direction they actually did want to go. And that hesitancy and why they initially pulled the card and everything just kind of re-solidifies, no, I don't want this to happen. I do know where I want my story to go.
Yes.
So you could also use it as just like a kick yourself in the butt tool when you are hitting some sort of like stagnancy and you're writing your story.
Yeah.
You could just be like, well, I can just veer off the road here, but wait, no, let me correct it and continue on course where I was actually happy with and content with what I was doing.
Yeah. The major thing as well with tarot is that each of the images are merely just archetypes. If you want to know more about archetypes, I would highly recommend checking out Jung's book on archetypes. It will really break it down to you what archetypes are and thus give you a much more enriched experience when reading the tarot. The thing about tarot is that for most of the time, if it's a storytelling deck that you have, because there are two types of decks out there, if it's a storytelling deck you have, you merely only have to look at the image and then decipher for yourself what you think that image is going to say to you. So you don't necessarily have to be an experienced tarot card reader such as myself or a few other card slingers that I know of. You can merely just pick up tarot and use it exclusively just for creative endeavors. You might look at, for example, like the death card and consider perhaps maybe it's a new beginning. Maybe it's new beginnings. How can I then put in the idea of new beginnings into my story? So it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the literal surface meaning of what that card has, but going a little bit underneath that literal surface and going a little bit deeper and then perhaps embarking on the idea of new ideas, new growth, new developments and stuff like that. So yeah, it all comes down to ultimately how you interpret and how you experience tarot cards as well as other divinationary tools. That's the good thing about the mind. So let's go into a little bit more detail, because I did sort of briefly bring up how names come to me through the idea of dreams, and that also kind of feeds into the idea of archetypes as well. While I won't go into too much Jung right now, that is something that I would like to do for a future episode. But one way that I do get a bit more excitement with my stories is how stories actually come to me in the first place. And like I said, it usually does start with the character way before I get into the idea of what the story is going to be or what it's about or how it's even going to play out. Now, you mentioned very briefly that you'd also started a story. So I was just wondering, how did the story come about for you for the temple?
Well, for me, I wanted to convey... for me, the only reason why I ever would want to write fiction is because I want to package a lesson and provide it to people who won't entertain these ideas and subjects without an interface.
Yeah.
There was I think, what was his name? Malachi Martin. He was a priest who was trying to explain that he was witnessing horrible corruption within the church.
Right.
And he felt that the only way he could actually get people to actually listen to what he was saying because of the absurdity of it, like it was like, I believe he was talking about like child sacrifice and aspects that people hear and they say, oh, that's not the real world. Meanwhile, they'll turn on the news and see that their neighbor is murdering their kids and they'll tune out the idea, oh, there's no way that there's people in control could be murderers and pedophiles, and they turn a blindfold eye to it and make it into a joke.
Yeah.
But Malachi Martin was like, okay, I need people to actually look at the issues here because this is happening in the church. And he wrote novels called, I think it's called Dust Through a Windswept Home.
Okay.
So he fictionalized it and provided it in a fictional world, but at least then that idea is out there and people can look at it and examine it and offer their feelings on it. They can discuss it. And they have a starting point for a discussion with people who would not entertain these ideas. And so for me, the temple started as I wanted to get this sleep temple idea up. How can I get people involved with hypnosis? How can I get people into this thing? So the idea came to me of this novel where this temple would basically be the main character, and then there's this revolving cast who help usher in this temple, and then from there it was just kind of basically setting up these characters, and they came all just through like synchronous events, and also just like meditation and, well, drug use, but that's not. I would just sit on my balcony and smoke and just let the ideas all come to me, freely associating, and it established that there's a like this temple has to start somehow. How has this land become magical? And then so I had this character that was in a drug-induced trance, and then he gets possessed by the spirit, and he does accidentally this like blood sacrifice in front of the steps of a building, which later gets repossessed and then ends up turns into the temple. So then you're always wondering, like, is this space good or bad?
Wow.
And then, but the energy of the place wins out, because then this negative event happens, and all of these people start entering into these like deep trance states. But it's almost like a dog when it's dying. They retreat and go to the solitude.
Yeah.
People, when they get into this like weird trance, it's like a disease, they wander out and disappear. So basically this temple starts realizing this pattern, and they say, like, if you start noticing you have these symptoms, come right away.
Yeah.
And then people all make a pilgrimage to this temple, and they recruit like healers and everything, and basically it's the temple guides you through this like visionary experience where you have to know how to navigate your way out of it, and once you did, then you would come out the other side, and you'd be in this world. It's almost like a virus idea, actually, where if you don't overcome it, you'll be succumb to it, and then you'll kind of like rot away or turn into like a lower form. Or I didn't quite flesh out how it would end, but yeah.
But don't give away too many secrets, yo.
No, but yeah, that's just.
So it came to you like after doing a bit of smoking, like most artists have done for centuries.
Yeah, but and it wasn't. I mean, that's not the source of it, but it's just that's how at the time that's how I would do my not by meditating. I don't mean like sitting and doing zazen. I mean just entertaining my thoughts and holding on to them and keeping attention upon them.
Yes.
Rather than turning it to entertainment for constant stimulation. I would be in meditation and engrossed on my ideas that I would allow to grow and blossom into something.
That's pretty cool. Did you ever at all experience that when you were perhaps sleeping or dreaming or anything like that? Did anything creative come to you through dreams?
Well, of course, dreams to me, like we'd have to go into a massive episode about like lucid dreaming and sleep control and like I've had a lot of ideas start as dreams because my dreams are quite vivid and interesting. So I would also recommend everyone keep a dream journal, because you may find that you dismiss your dreams because you wake up and you hardly remember it, but the better memory recall you get, you'll also may notice that there's some more interesting things in your dreams than you on the surface
sort
recall
of
when you wake
realize.
up.
Yeah. Especially with the patterns and stuff, especially if you get like reoccurring dreams and whatnot. It's actually kind of essential to always have that dream journal and have that as part of like your magical routine and magical discipline. So that's actually kind of handy. But yeah, I mean, Dylan's dreams, I've heard some of them over the years and they are intense. And I've always kind of like jibbed him by saying like every so often, like, your dreams are so intense, you should write this down as a short story. And he's like, no, I don't think I would. I swear if you had like a short story collection, they'd be like bestsellers. Like, it would be amazing. Your dreams are intense. They're really cool. But for me, dreams are a little bit more simple. For me, it's a case of if I have a story that I want to work on, or I'm trying to work on a particular series that I'm having a bit of an issue with, and tarot is helping, but not that much, because that can also happen too.
Wait. So how is that? How can tarot not help then?
Sometimes if I don't fully understand what it is the cards are trying to tell me, then I'll then write them down, like the keywords that keep popping out at me. And then I'll go to bed with that particular piece of paper in mind, and I'll keep thinking about those keywords in the hopes that I will then be able to induce some sort of dream or sleep experience where I can then work through whatever issues I'm having. That's where the subconscious comes in as well, because obviously whatever goes on in your day-to-day life, your subconscious subconscious every night has to try and make head and tail of what goes on with those particular experiences. If you're having problems, for example, if you're in denial about money or financial issues, or an issue that you have with your partner, or there's something consistently on your mind about a situation at work, you will end up having anxiety dreams about that situation until you actually resolve it in your waking life. So when it comes to stories, those are the kind of aspects of dreams that I then rely on to help me deal with a particular situation with my story. Other times when it comes to dreaming, it's a completely fresh story that I haven't thought about. It's completely new, and I will have a really vivid dream about a whole sequence of events, perhaps like the middle of the story or at the beginning of the story. Like with Wormwood Witches book 1, it starts with a prologue, which I'm having a lot of issue with right now. It started out as just the prologue. I wasn't entirely sure where the story was going to go, but it was a reoccurring dream. And then one night at 3 a.m, like a couple of hours before I was due to wake up for work, this dream came on so strong. And then when the dream was done, I ended up waking up really quickly and quite naturally. And the only thing I could think of doing at that moment was to sit down and write this entire sequence out. It was so fresh and so vivid in my mind, even after I'd woken up. And that's what ended up becoming my prologue, or sometimes my chapter 1. It just depends on what mood I'm in. But it's basically the foundation of this Wormwood Witches series. And so it's a very important aspect. And so if I'm not working with tarot cards on certain sequences, then I'll expect dreams to come to me instead. And then I'm able to come up with a really good idea for my story. Sorry, that's our dog. She was having a dream, but I think she stopped breathing and then woke up and realized she needed to dream. I'm sorry, to breathe. But yeah, so dreams are really important in that sort of sense as well. At the same time, with other aspects of the subconscious, I also am a firm believer of trying to get and maintain knowledge and conversation with the HGA, with your holy guardian angel. And I sometimes find that if I'm not working with the HGA on a creative endeavor, then I'm usually asking the muses through like simple spells that I do in my waking world. And I will ask the muses for a little bit of help on something. And if they don't sort of like imbue me with inspiration right there and then, it's usually at nighttime when I'm dreaming that they usually come to me and say, look, this is how you could do this. And look, this is how you could do that. So that's also kind of handy as well. Dreams are just really cool. The subconscious is very chatty. Like I was just then, just very chatty.
So let's just wrap up this episode.
Uh-huh.
What's one more tool that you could use from the occultism toolbox and apply it to writing?
One. Well, there's... Okay, sorry, right. So not one, but two. Very, very, very briefly. The most easiest tool that you could use, and you can have fun creating your own mats for this or your own boards for this, it's the pendulum. Where you have a string or a chain of some sort, and then at the bottom you'll have a ball or some sort of aspect, a crystal or something with a pointy end or something, and then you can just hold it out over a board that has yes and no going up and down perhaps, and left and right, and you know what I mean. You know what a board looks like. I shouldn't have to explain that. It's too complex for me to explain. And then you basically ask questions, and then the idea is that your subconscious then comes through your consciousness and then kind of swings your hand according to whichever happens to be the right answer.
We talked about this in the hypnosis episode, the use of a pendulum, and that it's the subcortical controls.
Yeah, so you could use pendulums. And the other is also automatic writing, which is something we'll expand on in a much later episode because it's a very, very enriching and complex and very interesting subject. But automatic writing is something that I tend to do as well. Not very often, but I tend to do it on a much more sort of like low-key basis nowadays. Back in the early days of my writing, going back like 10 years, I used to use it quite a lot for poetry, and then writing really terrible demonic stories that I used to write way back then, which are terrible, where I could sit and I would command my arm to basically sit and write out character names or place names, or if I wasn't quite sure on what I should call a villain or a particular chapter, I would then sit and just kind of start allowing my arm to sort of scribble on the page until I got something. And then sometimes it would just be a jumble of letters, and then I would sit afterwards, after the like automatic writing session, and then try and work out what I could derive from those jumble of letters. I remember one of my villains from a really terrible story that I wrote back when I was like 16 years old. I didn't know what this character was going to be called, and all I kept writing was VIC over and over and over and over again. It was VIC, and then there was a U, and then there was an S, and I just kept writing it over and over and over and over again. So eventually I stopped the session because I felt like I just kept hitting a brick wall. And then after a little while, the word vicious just kept popping into my head. And that's when I realised, oh, the villain's name is going to be Vicious. I don't know why. I don't know where that came from. I'm not sure what inspired it. But the villain's name ended up being Vicious, and then I ended up writing a really cool little story around a girl who realised she was actually an angel, and she's got a twin sister, and they were separated at birth, but for some reason she was brought up on Earth, and her twin sister was brought up in heaven, and like there was demons, and like Korn, Freak on a Leash, the album was like the soundtrack that I was listening to consistently when I was writing that particular story. So there was a whole kind of like mess there. But that's how I used automatic writing to help me out with just like singular words or certain terms and phrases that I wanted to use within that story. So yeah, like I said, we'll go into a bit more detail about automatic writing at a much later stage. It's one of my favorite tools.
Because the pendulum and automatic writing and even tarot are hypnotic techniques, but we could go into further detail about like using channeled visions to create stories which you can receive in hypnosis.
Yeah.
And that also then ties into automatic writing, and where the authors remove themselves and then produce writing without the strain of producing the writing.
Yes.
So it's like a lot of even like musicians get that, where they say, you know, I was just sitting at the guitar and the song came through me. I didn't invent the song. The song invented itself.
Yeah.
That happens with writing a lot as well in that. But I do want to save that whole entire discussion for our next episode on hypnosis, which would be like a not a part 2 entirely, but it will be. Basically, hypnosis part 2 discussion, going into art and hypnotism, and also mysticism and its links to hypnosis.
Yeah.
And that'll be looking at the Eastern and Western traditions. And so make sure you tune in for those discussions that we'll be having in the future.
Yeah.
Go back and check out what we've discussed so far, because there's lots of little gems in there. And you can do so. Well,
sorry. If you have anything to say about today's episode, or if you also use various tools for your creative endeavors, whether it's fiction or non-fiction or poetry and other genres like that, again, please let us know. We'll have it up on YouTube or over on Twitter or over on Instagram as normal. We'd love to know what you guys get to do as well.
Mm-hmm. So reach out to us on social media. We are available on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube.
Yes.
Just type in The Start and the End on YouTube. Visit the website, thestartandtheend.com or thesate.ca. If you want to type us on Instagram, we're thesate.ca. And on Twitter, we are just thesate.ca, I believe.
Yeah, without the full stop. Yeah.
So that's all we have for you today. Later, Satyrs.